Okay, we're talking to Trevor Page. Trevor is a director in Deloitte Consulting in the human capital practice.
Correct.
Hey Trevor, how are you?
Good.
You do research every year into trends in human capital, in employment practices, I guess. And you've been doing this for about 10 years.
Correct.
Can you tell us, what have you observed in terms of, amongst your clients, what have you observed over that 10 years? How has the employment experience changed?
Yeah, so in the early years with the survey, it was very HR process focused. So things like training, things like recruitment, things like performance management were very topical.
Right.
In the middle period, we started seeing many more organizational things coming through, like culture, like leadership development, organizational structures. And now we're moving to a stage where we're looking at the organization as a social enterprise as a whole.
Yeah.
So the human capital trends have moved from being very process-based to now very enterprise and ecosystem-based around the new world of work.
What do you mean by an ecosystem? Just describe that in layman's terms.
So in the world that we knew, we had an enterprise with a business. It was a self-standing business, fairly self-contained. It interfaced with its customers and its suppliers, but it was pretty confined to its own world. In the social enterprise of the future, you're living in a much broader ecosystem that goes broader than just your customers. All the macro environment is impacting on your organization. You just look at what happened in Joburg yesterday, where businesses were closed because there were macro forces out there.
Okay, better explain to people what actually happened. We had xenophobic attacks.
Yes,
in
yes.
Joburg,
So
right?
closed down many businesses in Johannesburg,
right.
And in a very unseen sort of way. So it impacted those organizations in a very negative manner. That's an ecosystem thing.
Right.
And it's been driven more and more globally. The ecosystem is impacting directly on our businesses.
Okay, so talk about jobs for a minute. I mean, you talk about a super job. What is that? We're moving towards the era of the super job.
Right, so that is the workforce of the future. The workforce of the future is looking at, number one, an alternative workforce. We're not having a permanent workforce in all our organizations anymore. We're having a lot of different kinds of workers that work for us for a period of time. They might be contracted, they might do specific projects for us, they might be in alliance partners, they might even be competitors in some instances. Arising out of that is we're getting the era of AI and robotics that is taking away the back end of a lot of jobs. So all the administrative transactional tasks people used to do are falling away. So people now can do 3 or 4 different jobs as a portfolio of jobs, and we call that portfolio of jobs a super job. It's a job that is thinking based and not doing based anymore, because the doing is being done by technology.
So are we talking about people are going to have to be more multi-skilled?
Very much so.
Rather than be very specialized as they were in the past?
You'll have a mix of both. You probably have a mix of both in terms of the different categories of skill that you need to delight your customer. So in some instances, it'll be a series of generalized jobs in a portfolio. In other, you'll have to have deep technical experience. But a lot of the actual analytical side of that you might have done, like an actuary where they'll do modeling, will be in AI. So actuaries will be doing a lot more higher order thinking than actuarial modeling.
Which is the same as the accountants. So there's a presentation just going on there where they're saying 45% of the processes that you are doing in a business today can be automated.
Correct.
So where it would take 6 CAs a number of days to do all these processes in a large corporation, you can do it in 6 minutes if you use AI.
That's correct. Now I come from an auditing company and we're being disrupted as well. Our whole audit of the future, we're designing right at the moment with the mindset that what is AI going to do in our audit world in the future.
Right. So that's a good question to bring up at this point, is the role of the accountant in the future, because so much of the work that they do is fairly robotic and repetitive.
Yes.
That can be taken over by AI. What is the accountant going to be doing in the future?
The accountant in the future is going to be interpreting a lot more very, very accurate data and helping businesses make very real-time, very accurate decisions about the health of their business and what they ought to be doing to, number one, comply, but on the other hand, to drive growth in their business. So it's a high-end advisory role that the auditors and accountants will be doing in the future versus a regulatory and compliance role. And that applies to a lot of the different professions as we know them.
Yeah, the bean counting profession is historical. It's backward looking, isn't it? I mean, you're always closing off the books for last month. But so you're always, to an extent, out of present time. And so if you can get your bookkeeping functions up to date and in present time, you then have more attention free to look into the future.
Correct. And the advisory role of professional firms like mine, I come from consultant. I'm not an auditor by profession, but the advisory component of the professions then becomes very, very topical, because in real time you can be helping companies to drive their customer experience, drive growth, drive margin, as opposed to reporting on it and saying this is how you did. This, you much more predictive and proactive, and that's actually the new world of work, and the new work, what we call the exponential profession.
What about your profession, Deloitte? You're one of the big four. Difficult times, the accounting profession worldwide is under a lot of scrutiny. How do you think that's going to change? Is consulting going to become the biggest arm? I think it might already be in Deloitte, isn't it?
Globally, consulting is already the largest part of our firm.
Yeah.
And I think that's a trend around what I just said to you, around the advisory end of having data. So data is important, but it's what you do with data in order to help clients succeed. And so I think the advisory component of all the big four will see exponential growth and into the future. As I'm not representing audit here, I can't, but certainly the advisory component of professional firms, in order to help companies position themselves against startups and against disruptors, will become, massively important, and that's where we'll probably make our money in the future.
Does the audit firm of the future, I mean, auditing in itself has become very much driven by regulatory issues. You have the IFRS, you have the global reporting initiative, you have all and ethics standards as well. You have all of these codes which have been developed. How much of that do you think is going to be taken over by AI?
Look, the regulatory side of most businesses, including banking, insurance, telco, etc., is real, and it's not stopping. It's getting heavier and heavier, as are the regulations on the professions.
Right.
So whether it's the legal profession, the audit profession, whatever you are, regulation and it becomes the last resort to try and stop problems occurring in different spheres of the economy. A lot of that, though, is based on ethical standards, which you can't put into AI. A lot of the regulation tries to force ethical and standards and things like integrity, which are human behavioral issues.
Right.
And they're cultural issues.
Yeah.
And I can talk to cultural issues because that is what is, where we are moving with the new world of work. We're moving into a whole new set of ethical standards around the interface of human with machine. And we're moving into a whole new world where organizational cultures are going to change because of this interface. And because jobs and work is going to be so different.
I mean, there is a trend, is there not, over the last couple of decades for larger companies to outsource a lot of their, what they would call their non-core functions. So you're seeing a lot of contracting happening. And a lot of even employees, they have a name for it, which I forget for the moment. But it's
gig workers.
Huh?
Gig workers.
Gig workers, that's
Yes.
the word, yeah. So you're finding a lot of that happening as well. So companies don't really, particularly in South Africa, given the tough Labour Relations Act and the cost of taking on an employee, they'd rather have a contractor than a full-time employee. Is that happening?
It's happening in South Africa as well. In fact, we have in the formal sector, we know that we have something in the order of 7 million alternative workers in the formal sector. We've done some of our own research in South Africa, and we say that it's conservatively, if you look at the township economy, informal workers form more than 14 million people in the South African
Wow.
economy. In the United States,
That's bigger than the formal sector, huh? The formal sector, I think, is 12.3.
correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So we now have more people in the informal alternative workforce
Yeah.
than we have in the formal work sector in our country. In the United States, out of their total workforce, they have something like 22 million people that are recognized as alternative workers.
And we have 14
And we have 40.
in a country of 55 million people.
And those are people who work on a part-time basis for mom and pop stores, spaza shops in the townships, mechanic shops, contract workers at large enterprises, seasonal labor on the winelands, etc. So South Africa is way down the track just because of our employment
So
situation.
don't you think from a policy point of view, we're putting far too much attention on trying to develop the formal sector instead of trying to actually expand and improve conditions in
Those
the
are
informal
probably
sector?
your words, but you're probably spot on with that. In that we're not recognizing, because public policy is way behind the reality of the new world of work.
Yeah.
New world of work is up here, and people are close to the new world of work. Public policy is way down here. So we're regulating for things that will never happen.
Yeah.
We're regulating for economy that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And we are regulating actually to put people out of work,
Right.
where we should be regulating to acknowledge the informal sector and get more than 14 million people employed.
Right. So, what's your take on the South African economy and the counting of GDP? Because from what you've just said, we have this huge uncounted sector, and I imagine a lot of that activity that is happening in the informal sector is also not being counted on the GDP. Would you agree with that?
Well, you see, that's what Nigeria did, didn't they? To in order for them
they
to become
changed the way
number
they
one,
count,
they changed
yeah.
the way they count.
Yeah.
I think if you did the same in South Africa.
And by the way, they became bigger than South Africa
Exactly,
in the process.
yes,
Yeah.
So I think if we were to do the same, we'd probably get the same results, because we are not counting the alternative sectors. We are not looking at the township economies, not measuring it, we're not building for it, not investing in it. And actually, that's the future. It's the entrepreneurs in both the townships, but also in our new generation of millennials who are having their own startups, who are working out of their garages literally, or out of their studies at home. Those are the disruptors of the future, and we're not investing enough in that, because the people who make policy only think about permanent employment and think of a formal economy, and they think of how do we regulate it. This is how do we release it, how do we build it, how do we invest in it. And when we get to grips with that and we invest more in that, we will actually drop our unemployment by a significant amount.
Trevor Page, Director of Deloitte Consulting. We're going to leave it there. Thanks very much,
Thank you,
Trevor.
Vince. Thanks, Kieran.
Okay.